things that we as consumers need to take. You take about gas stations. And you ask yourself, and I'm doing this for a project in New Energy because I'm wondering, what does the new gas station look like, and does there really one in the future? But it's more important about how we consume things. But each and every gas station at the beginning was actually owned and authored by the gas company. You had Texaco, Sunoco. And so all of these folks had to really create their retail presence, which became a partner presence. So much to the point that then people created a gas station, that the gas station had a convenience store, that these companies that you and I know and respect, Procter & Gamble, pick a name, Pepsi, that they made special packaging just for this store that became a partner for you to go and get your gas for an automobile. And now you start sort of fast forwarding that and you ask yourself, what do those partnerships really look like in an ecosystem? And guess what? Now you can get gas at Costco, at Safeway. You can have it delivered to your home. And so I think when you start seeing companies that understand and embrace the word ubiquity, you understand you will never get there without an ecosystem. And I'll drop the mic on that statement because it's a fact. And we can jump into the meat and potatoes of like why we're here. And we could also say, hey, who over history of time, because what we're doing is taking a snapshot of what you've seen. But you think of people like RCA, Whirlpool, like those were the real first technological companies that had to solve the distribution problems of getting to consumers with a new technology at mass scale that needed things to drive them like records or content. And so when you start thinking about those channel partners, and by the way, our industry adopted those same channel partners that you would find computer equipment in a Montgomery Ward's. You probably don't even know what Montgomery Ward's is. Now you just start thinking about that. Like, right, they're like a Sears or a JC. They never made it. Yeah. So it's interesting that we struggled even in our industry. What was that ecosystem? And then you ask something. We all actually had to invest in it. And that's why you saw big margins. And then you ask yourself, what's the real investment that I want to be able to give my ecosystem, and how do I ensure their success? And that's going to go down to the point that we just talked about, like the big ratcheting down. Is that the right reason? And the answer is yes, because the more that I get you addicted to my lifestyle of pushing my products, by giving you more money to do that, what do you think you wake up and think of tomorrow?
You're going to invest more.
You're going to invest more. And the more that I can understand that it's really about me having ubiquity and a footprint, and that I'll figure my continual monetizations, but I need to keep giving you as a partner more. And this is a big conundrum for a lot of companies. Direct, indirect, double bubble. How do I comp? What do I do? And then I think it's interesting.
Platforms versus features, right? Like what's a feature versus what's a platform feature?
Well, I think,
right? Like that's even a question for product orgs.
Most certainly. Who builds it, when, why? And okay, now we'll get into the circling back to Jeffrey Moore. But to truly circle back on that is, everybody looks at a channel as a route to market, and what they don't look at it as a customer coverage model. Because if you back out and you figure yourself like, I want to go for the golden rule, he, she, them who have the money, and that's usually the customer. And if I back in the best way to serve them, you're probably going to find out that it's a channel because of a model where you can have a ubiquity from a coverage, a service, a support, localization, language, and all of those things as you get bigger and bigger and bigger and extend it. But that said, I think we're really going to, this next decade of channels, I have a whole perspective on what enterprise selling looks like that we should come up with. I think enterprise sales reps go away. I think that companies are tired of being sold to, and that we have a whole new paradigm. And I think folks like Goddard over at G2 are leading what's new and what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just pressed record because Bobby and I were just riffing back and forth. I'm like, I don't even care where we start. Let's just hop in right now, like start recording, because Bobby's dropping some knowledge. So welcome back to PartnerUp. We have the Bobby Napiltonia. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us. And if you didn't hear Bobby, this is the first guest that we've had on twice on the show. And Bobby's first story was kind of around the origination of enterprise channel at Salesforce. And he shares some tips on how they really turned, Accenture into the SI that we, know, love, indifferent maybe about today. And kind of created that juggernaut of SIs that are really more focused on, SaaS and cloud that didn't exist prior to Salesforce. But Bobby was also at Salesforce during an equally interesting time. Perhaps the second half of his just the Salesforce story was the origination and kind of initial scaling of the AppExchange, right? So Welcome back to PartnerUp. We got Bobby on, and this is going to be a fantastic convo. Bobby, there was kind of a couple topics we were aligning on prior to starting, and one of the first questions I asked you, because I brought it up in the past couple shows, and I don't think anyone's had as strong a perspective as you might, given that today we want to talk about app ecosystems, I think, for a little bit, right? And some of that AppExchange origination story, but I still don't think that this is reverberated as far or as wide as it will, which was Microsoft dropping the hammer on their ecosystem. It's like 25%, 20, 15, there's kind of ranges, but down to 3%. What's your hot take on Microsoft making that move, given they're behind in the dynamic?
All right, so you said a couple of words there that I'd like to unpack as it relates to Microsoft, and let's give a big shout out to Satya and what he's done there. I mean, if you really think about, you've got to give credit where credit's due, without a doubt. And if you really understand the channel, Microsoft's truly been, without it, they would be nothing, just because of what their software set out to be, as it required a PC to work from the very beginning. So without an ecosystem, you had nothing. And we could reflect on that deal. Look, I think what they've realized is that the money that matters isn't the percentage of flesh I take from a partner, but it's the amount of partners I got pushing my product over time that I can have them have a great livelihood. And if I could get by with a 3% skim, to me, that's like a MasterCard Visa tax for taking your credit card transaction. If you think about that, that's just really a sore cost of doing business, which is a profitability on the partner back, which is what a lot of people look to have.
Right. This is not the revenue stream that I think people thought it was. And actually, in one of the prior episodes, one of my favorites, we had Jay McBayer, who's like the channel lead at Forrester. I love geeking out with Jay. And what's hilarious though, Bobby, is that Jay predicted that Salesforce would start to charge that margin on even services, right, that their partners are selling. And then Microsoft goes the exact opposite direction and drops the floor. Jay's prediction, he basically told me, he's like, I don't think that's going to happen now. I don't think Salesforce is going to start charging a margin on services like they did with the AppExchange. I think what you're illustrating is like, this wasn't the monetization engine, the direct monetization engine that maybe a lot of companies thought it would be, right? Like, okay, we build the ecosystem and then we monetize through commission or revenue share. And what Microsoft and Satya are saying is like, no, that's not the game.
Well, the quest of $50 billion will make you do a lot of things. And so probably everything will be thrown at the table. But you said something actually more important, I think, that we didn't unpack, which is late. When is Microsoft late? And I would argue, and I've never worked there and I've competed against them and I've beat them, fortunately, a couple of times in my career. But even when they come late, they've got the staying power and the wherewithal to be a juggernaut. I would argue what they lost, which was the most precious thing they learned from, which is mobile. And, if we look back 20 years ago, Microsoft Mobile was it. And then all of a sudden some stuff came and disrupted what they did. And I don't think that they've ever lost anything since then. And if you look at gaming, they were not even in gaming. And it would have been owned by Sony and PlayStation. And the one thing that they're able to do is really get developers to anchor around something to build content that drags a platform, that gets an ecosystem that really has that perpetual fulfillment machine. And so,
Yeah, I mean, the Xbox ecosystem is arguably one of the best.
And it went from zero to
created.
I'm number one or two around the world quickly. And I believe as we look to the cloud, look, it's so early. It's still so early. And if you look at their initial investments with, go back to that name, Accenture and Avanade, to truly try to make Azure a mainstream. But let's just fast forward. And if we think about 10 years from now, what technology companies exist, what will be the most important thing? It'll be their ecosystems. Because the only way that we're going to hit every single corner of the world and corner case of a technology extension is by understanding how we get the partners to build local and things that are unique to what they want to get out of it.
100%. I think this is a good segue into the book that I've been bringing up more and more. I think the episode where we had Sunir Shah on, shout out again to the Cloud Software Association. See how I work that back in? So if you're not a member of the Cloud Software Association, go join the Slack group, participate in the discussion. It's 4,000 partnership professionals. And then we have the conference coming up at the end of the fall. So Cloud Software Association, join the Slack group, join the discussion. In his episode, he brought up Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, which is a 90s book, is still as true today as it was then. And I've been less interested, Bobby, in like trying to follow the latest trend. I've been more interested lately in the things that don't change, right? And crossing the chasm in terms of like owning your early adopters and then breaking into the laggards, the late market. You've experienced that a couple times where you got caught in the middle or you finally traversed it. And I think in that time that it was written and then the Salesforce AppExchange had merged, I would love for you to, as we're thinking about the future, let's go back, right? Because the things that don't change often are the things that drive what will change. I think the Salesforce AppExchange story probably has a lot of informative lessons for our audience and the people thinking about creating ecosystems today, that it might look entirely different, but there's some lessons in there that we should probably all learn from. So let's go back to that concept. Salesforce had primarily high tech companies, right? I mean, those were your customers, was tech companies mostly. You had enterprise channel, which we talked about in our previous episode, and then there was people that wanted to integrate. Let's talk about crossing the chasm and how the AppExchange.
Yeah, most certainly. So I actually think there's probably a lot that we can unpack there in terms of what that AppExchange would do. No, but we won't. But let's start and do the same thing. I'm most proud of a lot of what I've been had the opportunity to build and work on, and particularly with Mark on the AppExchange. And it was 2 years in the making before I joined him, and eventually said, "Yeah, I'll take on that." Sure, and they had become public, and it seemed like it was a Herculean task that was worth the roll of the dice on. And that said, it really turned out to be that way. And look, we were a young company. And Mark's thesis was no software means no services, means no ecosystems, means no billion-dollar organization, means what are we going to do? And fortunately, somehow my name kept coming up, and we reconnected and connected. And finally, in the first week of May that year, I joined him and I inherited 2 employees to figure out what we were going to do around it. And I got to bring a lot of my past with me, having run some very, very, very large channel organizations in the past. And what we tried to set out to do was really, and you've heard me say this, how do we meet the customer's needs, knowing that we can't do everything, a la the ecosystem? And so taking a page out of Jeffrey Moore's book, which I talk to a lot of startups today in general, and surprised how many don't even know who he is. I'm thinking, what are you doing? It's like, stop being an entrepreneur if you don't understand any of these theories that still exist. And it was around core versus context. And as you can imagine, we want to do everything. You're trailblazing a new industry. You've got to create it. And what we realized was that we couldn't do everything. And in the session that we had with Jeff, we really beat up what is core, what is core, what is core. And it came down to it's CRM. And if you could own the customer master, just like SAP owns the product master, just like Oracle owns the financial master, and you could own that master and have a data model be that customer, you can all of a sudden span out and have this fan. And a lot of our early work was the diagrams that showed you what you could have offering wise, is that if I was core, and that was the CRM piece, I then started to understand, what do my customers need? And this is where the first ring came. And the first ring was complete, complement, and extend. And so you asked that question, I want to integrate, I want to do some things. Well, the first phase of this was, how do I complete my offering? And so the early partners were marketing, configuration, the things that you would want a salesperson to do, ultimately the folks like the DocuSigns to sign it to complete the transaction. But so then we did compete. Great. What completes a sale that we can compete against a Siebel or someone at that time that had an offering? Then the complement. What could we bring that would give us something that no one else had? And this is really early on when we were talking to people like the Hard Hanks and the Datas and the company that had data that we wanted to bring in and help cleanse and give fresh data, because CRM is nothing without data. And so we then said, well, this will help complement. And then we said, let's complete it. Well, or extend it. And this is where the integration comes in. Now, these were all really early ideas of what we thought we needed to get to. And so our first apps were built by our SEs. And these were Salesforce labs that gave you the opportunity to start thinking, I could build these things. And we knew in our heart of hearts that we needed to start getting like some real ISVs, someone to actually say, I want to do this, because otherwise it was two guys in a trick duck trying to complete something that were unfunded. And that's when we realized, let's start with what we have. And these were the SIs. And we created a blending and a blurring between an SI and an ISV. Keep going.
I actually want to unpack that just for a second, because I want to see, like, it's table stakes for most SaaS companies to have a dev API, right? Like of reasonable maturity, right? So let's say you're past the, two people in a truck, right? But you have employees, you have developers, you have go-to-market, you're in revenue, right? You're in scale mode, or just you have an API, right? It's a footer on your website. People can, make calls against it. But the transition from having an API to having a platform, people aren't really sure where to take that first step.
Well, no, it's every SE. So no. Every SE got to build an app. Every SE. So now, because we had to create, 20 different things to show you the art of the possible.
Every SE.
Oh, most certainly.
Okay, pause. Is that an enduring principle, right? So if I'm thinking about, like, I have a sales consulting organization, should I go out and try to do partner recruitment first? Or should I make my SEs experts on the platform and have that feedback loop with product to go, hey, here's where our APIs and here's what I'm hearing from customers?
Well, I think everybody should drink their own champagne. Everyone should drink their own champagne before they build on our thing, right? Just by principle.
Should we start with SEs?
Right. Then you know if it's poisonous.
Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot. I'm going to go talk to my head of. Yeah, I'm going to go talk to my head of sales consulting immediately now and be like, all right, we got a new thing.
It's interesting. You asked earlier, we talk, what are enduring principles? That's one. Every SE should pretend like they're a customer. Every engineer should work 2 weeks and support a year. Not yet.
Absolutely. So you got the SEs, and they were playing around with the app, but there wasn't commercial opportunity, right? Like they weren't driving adoption. It was like the art of the possible.
Early adopters, like who could we go after? And these were the two guys of the trick ducks. You got to remember, not only were we young and early, the people to place bets, the ecosystem is young and early to place bets. And so really trying to get people that cared enough to bet on their future was tough. So I'll tell a story. So we one of the things that I loved about working with Mark was we fabricated the stories and we orchestrated the outcomes. And we had to do that because no one else had ever done some of the things that we had done before. And so you really had to go, this is a moonshot, this is the thing. And so if you fabricate, I want a world that looks like, you then say, I just need these color paints, these type of clouds, these types of things, and you can actually orchestrate that occurring. So we knew that we needed a large ISV to validate that SaaS at the time, it wasn't called cloud, was real and people would buy it. And thankfully, a company called BMC Software, you probably never heard of them, the largest provider of mainframe software, mainframes used to be around, and just bought a company called Remedy. And Remedy was a client server that did service and support. And so we had an internal product called BugForce. And so what we did was we cross-licensed it to them, and it became Remedy Force. And within a matter of 30 days, the world's biggest company supporting mainframes had a SaaS app. And if they could do it, guess what? Anybody else in the world could too. And then we got behind that with that arrow to help them get market traction.
Interesting. I mean, that story allows you, like, that narrative for subsequent ISV partner recruitment is like,
and look, all of a sudden, I want to know how you help them. I want to know what you did. I want to be like them, because everybody has FOMO when you get the dinosaur to move. And so we could then go over like enablement, what were the modeling, how did we look at them by category, by segment, by sector, alignment to product management. But the first phase, so we just went over that first ring, complete, complement, extend. And then the second ring ends up coming is build, buy, or partner. And when you have this framework for where you want to get to, you can say to yourself, I know I need everything. I can't build it. I can't buy it. What I just need to partner. And it allowed you to have some strategic maneuverability into making your decisions. But it got better than that, because over time, we ended up bringing VCs into the mix to show them that not only, it was interesting. You made a statement earlier. Why do we charge for the AppExchange? Look, I took about 90% of your problems away from you when you actually came and build. And we were very prescriptive of what people should build early on. And we helped them build these product offerings because we wanted them to build successful companies that would then get VC funding that would create this ecosystem that would allow us to have Salesforce Ventures that ultimately we funded our future by having other VCs funded alongside of us by giving you a built-in go-to-market that would ensure your success if you complied to operating the way I want you to.
Yeah, and Salesforce Ventures has not been successful at all, right? I mean, it is such a, what people don't realize, I think, in a lot of ways is if you really zoom out and try to build from perfect backwards, and you think about this, like partnerships really becomes corporate strategy. So like one of my friends and mentors, like Brad Coffey led the development of like HubSpot Connect and HubSpot's, SMB ecosystem, right? Which is probably I would say it's the second best ecosystem in SaaS, in modern SaaS. Like Salesforce crushed it. And then, of recent, HubSpot undeniably the next best one. And having participated in it, built on it, and helped them form it, I couldn't disagree. And what's interesting is that Brad started in product, right? Got into BD, and then that became corporate strategy. And then what's interesting is that at PandaDoc, where I was at leading sales, Bobby, I got Brad to make the first ever investment, first one, from HubSpot into a company, PandaDoc, because we were their first like real big CRM integration partner.
5. More certainly. Look, this goes back to staying principles will stand the test of time, and you may tweak them or put toppings on them. The flavors are always the same.
It's so interesting how you just mentioned that kind of coming full circle is like, I think that's what the executives that tune into this episode, because whenever we have someone like Bobby in, we tend to widen the base beyond partnership.
John Samorja and I work fairly closely on that, trying to identify which to invest in, what to do, what geographies, how they would help us in training. But let's just take a page out of that full circle. And since we're telling a story, we're telling a story about old world companies. There was a company called Borland. Do you remember Borland? No, probably not. So these were all big juggernauts during their decades. And we had a customer there who was the CIO, and he saw our product. And again, mainframe, old school technology. And he saw the product and he was like, oh my God, this is the future. And we got him as a customer. And the next thing you know, he saw the light and he left. And he joined a gentleman that I had met after I spoke at a conference and came up and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you. I'm going to be your next biggest partner. And you can imagine we had a lot of people that did that at that time. And so I'm a fairly friendly person, and I'll listen or talk to most people. It's just time. And unless it's a crazy conversation. And so we went to lunch, and it turns out that it was just him, but he used to work at SAP, and he worked in the office of Shai Agassi. And after they acquired his company, and he realized SAP would never have a cloud business, he wanted to create something on his own. And so we connected this CIO from Borland and this gentleman named Narinder, and they created a company called Aperio, and we took them to Sequoia and got them funded. And we wanted to grow in Japan, so we let them be our distribution arm and services arm, really, so that we didn't have to grow services there, to your point. And then they ended up selling to a big SI. And now Chris Barbin, that CIO from Borland, has a new company. And the best form of flattery is he's out teaching companies how to be successful in the Salesforce ecosystem. So the fact that we could take a CIO from a company and 20 years later, he's preaching and teaching a religion that we started that really made an industry go, as a testament to how you can not just affect and change lives, but have other people adopt your story, your strategy, create a business, sell it for $1 billion, and then go teach everyone in the world why this is the next best thing for them. And that's pretty incredible. That doesn't happen often.
Well, the reason why I asked is
I've not heard Tackle.io.
There's a company right now. So what's hilarious is that story, I didn't know if it was related because the CEO's name is escaping me. But have you heard of a company called Tackle.io? This is crazy. You're going to look at it after the call. You know what Tackle does? They're a super fast growing company. And you know what they do? They help companies launch their first app on ecosystems. So like Microsoft,
it is
right? Like AWS, like they help companies get into cloud marketplaces. And whenever this started, I'm like, wild. Yep. Like, is this going to work? Like, is there really a service and an application to help companies use marketplaces for distribution? And it is a wildly successful hyper growth company now, right? Like, there's an entire sub industry of people that are helping other companies launch in cloud marketplaces today. So like, check out Tackle if you're trying to get actually.
My wife and I talk about that. She's a cloud queen, and we joke around that she should just go help people get easy on ramps and collect a toll at the beginning and just sit back.
What Tackle does, they'll help
and be a toll, because there isn't a lot of knowledge over the decades that you get to help people go from 3 years to 1 week and understanding how to get and be successful, right?
No, I mean, as someone that's gone through AppExchange listings multiple times, that process is still as opaque as it was my first time that I went through. And I'm sure that's not your intention of kind of creating it. And I don't want to get caught up in the nuance of that. I mean, there's more to that story of like how marketplace ingestion works and some of the things you do need to set up, security, InfoSec, all that.
Oh, without a doubt. Look.
Let's extend beyond that second.
So they're top tier for two reasons. Number one, they crack the code perhaps better than anyone, that if you invest in my ecosystem, you're going to have $1 billion unicorns. I mean, think about that. Like, what other ecosystem has that type of machinery operating and working? Then you take this last couple of years, they're investing outside of their core competency into places like Snowflake, because the understanding of the future of where the cloud will be, we don't know, but we know data lakes will play a role in what they will. So to your point, without a doubt, top tier, but top tier in a unique way that no one else has been able to ever even come close to thinking about replicating. Think about Sapphire Ventures. Look, take Microsoft Ventures, Sapphire Ventures, take all those other people. Having been part of the Salesforce community, I will tell you that we out-operated because of the way in which we injected you back into our world and your importance for the success of our customers greater than anyone else out there.
What's interesting, too, going back to the Microsoft point, right? So Microsoft reducing their commission, so to speak, down to 3%.
But why?
I could imagine Salesforce retaliating in a way that could.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, you're chasing the wrong problem, which is, what am I paying for and what am I getting, and is it worthwhile for me? And you as an entrepreneur are going to decide which ecosystem or ecosystems you'll play in based upon your core competency and where you want to live and land. That said, you can have $1 billion company just living in one ecosystem, and if you don't like the way one operates, you can move to another.
Well,
look, we said the configuration was the first one. He was one of our first configuration partners.
You brought up Godard earlier, right? So G2, obviously, that he's had a few exits.
Configuration partner.
He sold big machines to Oracle, right? And then he did the same thing with SteelBrick, and then he built SteelBrick, which is now Salesforce CPQ. But look at Apttus.
Whoa.
So if you're not familiar with Apttus, Apttus was neck and neck with SteelBrick in the CPQ space. They went all in on the Salesforce ecosystem. Godard obviously out-entrepreneured them because he's fantastic. He's just got the Midas touch. And then Apttus, whenever SteelBrick got acquired, Apttus was screwed. They were set to go public, canceled the IP.
That will be a case study in individuals and not technology. And if you really know the true Apttus story, being there from the beginning, we'd table that for another conversation, because I think that what you see on the street might not necessarily reflect what occurred. And I'm well familiar with Apttus.
Okay, so without getting into the the underground of that conversation, do you think that's something that people are at risk today, though, Bobby? Like, so whenever you think about build, buy, partner. Yeah, you think about build, buy, partner, and you're creating this ecosystem strategy. If you think about it from like the startup perspective, a couple hundred employees, right? We have a Salesforce app, we're playing in this ecosystem, whatever. And I feel like I have that conversation. Are we too dependent, right, on the juggernaut, on the Adobe, the Microsoft, the Salesforce? Are we too siloed? We need to diversify. I feel like a lot of people are having those conversations.
So that's a great question. You have to remember that all of our early customers didn't have previous businesses because no SaaS existed for them to actually do something with. So if so all of those names you just mentioned never had a prior life. And by the way, like Apttus, that guy was a product manager at BEA where I worked, and Ed Van Sicklen on my team convinced him to come build this app that we needed around contract management that started the whole story of how they became who they are. So when you think of genesis of most of those early companies, they really came out of our group. And we had a lot of rhyme and reason. Now let's unpack, how connected to motherships should I be? Because that's what I really think you're asking yourself. And if you've got a ubiquitous technology, and you also have to remember, we're still so early in the cloud rollout. Less than 10% of IT budgets have been deployed. So you picking an ecosystem to live in, getting you to $1 billion, when 10% of the budget's been spent, gives you the opportunity to support a second and a third ecosystem if you have a product that's horizontal enough to actually stratify them, right? Meaning the problem's pervasive regardless of which ecosystem you're in, which a lot of the problems will be. But by the way, look, wait. Companies struggle with this forever. If I was an ISV 15 years ago, I wanted to know, did I build to support .NET or Java? Right? I mean, there's no different. And then I determine which market share am I going to land on to have a business and what do I want to do? Think about that. Like if you created .NET and Microsoft came up with something in their portfolio that killed you, you were really screwed because you could only live in their world.
I'm actually going to take this as an interesting aside because this is a very interesting question that I haven't heard anyone talk about in my entire career of partnerships is the AppExchange and Apex, right? So there's this programming kind of like interface middleware language. You just brought up how, Microsoft built an ecosystem around like .NET, right? And what I'm seeing opposite of that today is like, well, what are the people going to build in Drift or like whatever other application that's being built out there?
Yeah. All right. You got me on this topic that I'm beyond passionate about, which what's the future really look like? I've been very fortunate. Most of my career has been the pointy piece of the spear. Most technology companies that I've worked with that we grew to $1 billion were so early that we tried not to get enough arrows and die, and then we ended up being able to become the standard. But these low-code, no-code platforms, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and 3 weeks ago she told me she loves spreadsheets, and I asked her, what do you love about a spreadsheet? And she said she actually manages her employees. I'm like, what employees? And it turns out in Roblox, she's built a gymnasium and she's got 12 kids that work for her and she's got calls on Sunday nights they come to and they've created leotards that they're selling stuff out of. And here's a girl that I'm trying to figure out what she's going to do when she grows up. Yeah, now I'm sitting. By the way, I've tried to get her to be an entrepreneur more than once and we've got a bunch of URLs and I've tried prodding her. We've got a lot of great business plans we could pull out and dust off. You might wonder where they come from, but she's found one passionate for her. Now let's go into how many engineers are graduating in America this year on an ecosystem. Wait, we don't even go there. Let's go to address your problem. How many engineers are graduating in America this year? 30,000. How many openings in America for engineers are there? 300,000. All right. Problem is only going to get worse. Low-code, no-code platforms will take a place for a class of applications, and we may not have a world where we need developers to develop, but we need developers to build platforms that we can consume. Because you also have to remember those early platforms required you and I to be way smarter than what you and I are. Today, you and I can actually go do things because the machinery's gotten so much to the point that I can tell it what I want to build, and it's going to actually build it and test it and make sure it can even scale before I roll it out. That was never happened before. We're in for what I do believe will be a whole new class of not just enterprise applications, but what an enterprise landscape will look like.
Yeah, so if you look at Zapier, Tray.io, Workato, these are all relatively low no code kind of applications, connective tissue. It was inevitable. And it's fantastic to see those businesses. I love those businesses. They make my life easier as an entrepreneur, in partnerships, just in general. Like it makes business productivity easier. But I'm kind of curious, like if you look towards what's the next ecosystem, for example, like HubSpot's Connect program, there isn't that underlying thing that's Apex, right? Like is ubiquitous to Salesforce or .NET to Microsoft. Is there going to be, in terms of like business applications, what needs to be created, if not a no or low code platform that allows?
Well, okay, so let's step back. Those all came about at a point in time where you didn't have standards that you could actually integrate on, and .NET is a little bit different than Apex because it's a real language and framework. Right. Well, look, Apex was named by a gentleman named Craig because it was the top of the pinnacle that you could write to. And I remember the meeting and I thought to myself, this is going to be horrible. You have to remember, prior to Salesforce, I ran some of the largest developer networks in the world at BEA in terms of Java. And prior to that was exposed to them at Creative Labs, where 99% of the software that was ever built applied to and worked with our standards. So when you think of ubiquity, it doesn't get much better than 99%. So when you think about that, getting a developer to adopt a new standard is like a religion, and people were really difficult for religions, which is ultimately why Salesforce bought Heroku, because we needed a runtime layer that we could run Java applications. And where Apex was really the beginning of the mashups. And I would argue Apex was kind of equivalent to what ETL tools did, where I'd extract, translate, and then write. But we needed to get to this new paradigm. And so Apex allowed you to write code and triggers. And by the way, Force.com was arguably the first mainstream enterprise low-code, no-code platform. And that's 15 years ago.
Right. So, I mean, you have developers that know how to do Apex and these triggers, but they're not... I might contrast the phrase and tell me if you agree with this.
No, look, your house has finished work. You have a foundation that was built by an engineer that was an engineer. He was just happened to be a structural engineer. And then you've got the carpenter and the painters, which are equivalent to the developers that came and make it look pretty and for you. So once the skeletal infrastructure is in by the people that actually know how to build massive things, then you can do all of the pretty things on top of it, which is what developers do. Content, flavor, those types of things.
So that really is the question, I think, that a lot of people can't answer whenever they have APIs, they have integrations, right? I mean, if you look at most MarTech or sales tech software companies like an Outreach or a SalesLoft or a Drift or 6sense, whatever, they're going to have dozens of integrations built on their public REST APIs. But none of these companies that are best in class, even unicorns, right? Like category leaders in emerging categories, have that abstraction layer on top of their APIs that allow customers to do things like triggers that you would do in Apex. Not even HubSpot Connect necessarily even has that yet. So it really begs the question, I feel like the next emergent ecosystem is going to have something that allows people to not necessarily to be engineers, but more like developers that can build customization on top
She's
of
a creator
basic API
economy
calls.
person.
Right. I mean, you don't even need APIs on top of that, right? Like, I mean, it's
okay. What did you just say? What did my daughter not do? My daughter did not open a rec. She did not hire developers. She did not interview them. She did not overpay them. She did not let them leave her next week.
Wow.
There's a lot of did nots that allowed her to do. And when I was blown away. So it just let me also start believing. I saw the future. I don't know what it means to me, because it's definitely something where we can enable a group of people to solve problems that we don't even know exist. So you ask a question, let's unpack that. We don't know what the enterprise platform could look like because we haven't seen the TikTok of the enterprise yet. No, but what we did see was, hold on. Now let's see if we unpack that. We did see the Skype of the enterprise. Let's just argue that Salesforce was the Skype. Not to compare how they were bought, sold, or traded, but just in terms of paradigm shifting from a telco, infrastructure, hardware, rollout, all that stuff, to just software to make a call. Salesforce, same way. You didn't need all that stuff. Software to run your business. Well, what if all you really need is an idea and a person?
Well, actually, you know what? This is an interesting intersect, which is like Slack, for example. Actually, Slack is very interesting because there's a ton of customizations, right, and triggers and reminders and workflows and things that you can set up on top of Slack that actually matches somewhat similar to what we were just discussing. And I see it every day. Like, I'll type a certain phrase into Slack and I'll get a custom reaction, right? I could set up a whole bunch of things that, I'm not an engineer by trade, that allow me to customize.
Look, you made me think of something I hadn't thought about, because I think about the enterprise. I think a lot of the enterprise problems to solve are boring. They're problems. How am I going to have a better secure container to get my Kubernetes to move my 90%? Like that shit all's got to be taken care of and addressed. But they're really not novel problems that are going to be breakthrough like the ones we just said, like low-code, no-code platforms that we don't have this constraint of developers, and innovation runs perhaps more rampant and more wild than we've ever seen before, because this creator community actually knows. By the way, we don't even know what an enterprise will look like in 15 years. Where will we be doing our manufacturing intents? I mean, this is really a good time. I don't know that anyone could pull it off. And so to your point, is it going to be a federated way in which these big 3 or 4 say, look, we're going to keep fighting for turf wars? I'm going to disagree, just because when you think about the 90% that haven't been moved to the cloud, it tells me there's a lot of money up for grabs. Now, let's go on to this next story. Hold on. Wait. You and I just talked about the constraint on the amount of people and the engineers. And we just said 90% needs to get to the cloud. Where are they going to find their engineers? how are they going to become software companies? Because I'm going to argue with you, everyone's going to have to be a software company at some point in time, and they don't have the competencies, the capabilities, or the DNA. So if we think the last decade was tough, just imagine how tough the next decade could be. Bringing what you just said, let's go back to Jeffrey Moore. We got the early adopters. We're swimming in early majority. Now we're going to go into mainstream. We haven't even thought about the laggards or the next phase in terms of sunsetting, that we would wash, rinse, and repeat this, because we're still in the second wash cycle.
That is mind-boggling big, because if you really think about it, there's a 10x shortage in engineers, but your daughter's example is so illustrative of being able to create value on top of an ecosystem that involves no engineering work, right? There wasn't engineering work that she did at all. And
well, let's go there.
That is
let's go there. So what just happened this week in the consumer world for the creator economy, which could be most disruptive for them? And I don't know if it's a flavor of topic for your podcast, but it's real and it's in the news. And I was listening to Jason Calacanis talk about it just this week, which is what Fans Only did
in the consumer world that is going to completely transform the enterprise.
OnlyFans, yeah.
Oh yeah, the OnlyFans debacle. What they were trying to do. What's interesting is like those examples are good because they from a business standpoint. So like take any politics or any of the fringe components of like the top.
It was purpose built
matter. Away from it. Let's just look at it.
Isn't a .NET framework purpose built for
that was the creator
ecosystem?
Economy? That was the platform. And I believe.
Look, we can learn a lot of things where consumerism will be far above because of the adoption curves of you and I being able to be whimsically deciding what we want to do versus an enterprise that we then can see 1 to 5 years later they follow on some of these models that will go. Look, you see right now Canva's hiring for someone to come lead their enterprise, and you're thinking Canva's for freelance designers. What will an enterprise do? Well, what if you can unshackle the old ways of an enterprise doing business because a new economy player came and completely disrupt up their design?
Yeah, I mean they're democratizing design, right? Like Canva's going to have a platform. They're going to be the design platform for every SaaS application. So if you ever need something customized, Canva's going to be like right.
Look, I got a Plex server to upload movies so I could watch for my daughter in the different formats. It was so hard. I struggled. I had to give up. But we should have started the segment with what was the initial thesis for the AppExchange? And I want to make sure we at least touch that. My objective from Mark was every employee needs a login. Go figure out what they need. If we were selling Salesforce into a company, what percentage of the people would actually use a Salesforce login? 10%. So the goal was I want 100% of employees at every company logging in. What will those apps be, and how do we get them, and how do we use the customer master to extend it so that everyone in the legal department needs to do it to review it. Everyone in the product department needs to see you might even remember. I heard this just the other day again, listened to a podcast on Starbucks launching the Idea Exchange, which we haven't even talked about, which was a product that we launched so we could take ideas from our customers on what we should build because we were building into a frontier no one ever experienced before. Well, you had a big word. It was a small word. You didn't even ask me if AppExchange was the first name, and I'm going to have to tell you no, and we'll save that for a subsequent one because it was a small trip down to Cupertino that changed our name from App Store to the AppExchange. And I'm going to leave you on that one and drop that dime.
Bobby, there's been way too many bombs dropped in this conversation, and you're going to have to.
I don't look. I like you personally, which is why I do this. I don't do a lot of them, not because I don't like sharing. You scored a place in my heart when I met you the first time, and I want to help you be successful. But I also want to help you get to the point in your career by taking knowledge from folks like me that we can actually find the next generations of you. Because I don't know who you are, but you do, and they follow you. So I want to help you be successful, and all of your peers that really want to make this a great place. Because guess what? We have a phenomenal industry that can change lives. And on that note, I will ask everyone, let's do something for everyone from a diversity perspective, and let's let everyone have a chance. We didn't even get to talk about the importance of the AppExchange for us to really reach into the far corners that anyone could be a millionaire by building an app, and I would give you a building, go to market, and some of the same things we tried when I was at Twilio in designing that ecosystem that we can empower those that couldn't to be those that have.
It is such an empowering field of the business world to think about ecosystem as it really is the most democratizing component of being an entrepreneur is ecosystem. It's not actually your employee base. So like, you just unlocked an entirely separate conversation. Like if you really want to be committed to DEI, are you just going to do that solely by way of hiring people? Like, no, it's ecosystem. That's how you really start to level the playing field and move past, equality into some of this equity conversation that's top of mind for everyone. Bobby, this was incredible. We got to have you back on for another series. So that means we're going to be texting and shooting emails back and forth and figuring out how the heck we turn this into some sort of series, because we really appreciate you giving back. I have done dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of calls with people starting in partnerships. That's why I started this podcast, to give back, because there is no book. There is no formula or manual. Like it takes people sharing these ideas and these conversations. That future of ecosystem, the analogy with your daughter,
all right,
that's probably going to be impacted by what comes out of this podcast and these discussions and the democratizing of knowledge that, has really been institutionalized and not shared broadly. So partner up. With that being said, that's Bobby Napiltonia, but everybody. We'll see you all next time.
All right. Thank you so much, Jared. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely.